on the cloud so that those of you who might have had to miss it will get to see it on the website. And I want to say that I'm especially excited to introduce Robert, who, as you all will understand, is my favorite artist in our stable of off-Main artists. I think I'm allowed to say that since I'm married to him. So we're going to start, and I'm going to ask you some questions, Robert. And as you asked everyone who has appeared with us, as the first question, tell us about yourself as an artist. You're muted, honey. Oops. Let's get you unmuted. There you go.
All right. So since I'm older now than when I started being an artist, um, I have had years and years of experience. Um, and so I started off as a college English teacher. Then I got an MFA mostly in painting. I did some printmaking. I learned how to make books at Penland School of Arts and Crafts in North Carolina. I went there 3 or 4 times. I spent years doing bookmaking projects with children in schools, teacher education, college campuses, as a way to, as a former English teacher, to promote literacy and art making in schools, and especially with teacher education. So teachers would start thinking about doing art in their own classrooms that combine literacy. In the past 20 years or so, I've become I've pushed myself to become a printmaker. Printmaking is much more exciting to me than painting. It allows for wild experimentation. And my father and his father, and I think my grandfather, great grandfather, were printers. And my last name, in fact, should be Shreefter, not Shreefter. And Shreefter is a writer and closely associated with printing. So I'm very happy to be a printmaker because also the history being part of a family tradition, but also it's repeatable for the most part. It allows for variations. And so I'm happily making prints, mostly screen prints lately. How's that?
Great, thanks, Robert. For many years, you've been a gallery curator at Off-Main and for years before at Lesley University. And I'm wondering if you see any relationship between being an artist and a curator.
Um, yeah, I think those two categories, if you're have the pleasure, the honor of doing both, it's hard to pull them apart. I think being an artist informs being a curator, and being a curator informs being an artist. I think the thing about curation is these issues about conversation, that the work, besides looking good together, I always find, and Wendy and I do the curating of all the work in Off-Main, we're very good, I think, at creating conversations um, among one artist's work. And so to try to have things really inform each other, but uh, converse. But also when we've had I think 10 or 11 artists this past summer, and summer before, to create a space where the conversation is also among all the artists, especially in different rooms. I think without thinking about it too much, I think it informs my work as an artist, that I think about the conversation in each of my pieces, and then maybe think about the conversation, especially across a body of work. So, a body of work, which you're seeing tonight, is made up. I think there are 4 different series in this body. And there are conversations because the works are related, but the work are also very, very different. But I think they have a kind of relational basis, and they also speak to each other. I'm trying to go fast because there's lots of questions, and so that's how I think those 2 things inform each other.
Okay, great. Thank you. The next question I'm going to ask is related to your statement in which you describe your screen printing as a process of mapping that connects feelings, memories, spaces, places, and that you work intuitively, anticipating moments of surprise that come with the territory of printmaking. Can you tell us more about the elements of surprise or happy accidents in any of these particular pieces?
Well, this large series of work is narrative, even though the narrative is more understandable, knowable to me. I'm not as so interested in I'm interested in the viewer seeing it, liking what it looks like, but also maybe feeling something. But these are embedded with narrative about my growing up. These are some of them maps of where I grew up in Brooklyn. They're not they're fictive maps. They have figures in them. Some of them the figures are not as as clear. But I work in this way, and for any of my friends who are here tonight, like Susie Nielsen, she and I have taken classes, lots of classes with the wonderful Vicky Tomeko, who is the most kind and expert share of her secrets and printmaking teacher. I
She's
Printmakers are
also here.
known, and that's what I said.
Yeah.
Who's also so printmakers, unlike painters, are very neat. Printmakers are mostly dealing endlessly with setting up, processing, and then cleaning up. And I do those things, but I work in a way as my printmaking teacher said in graduate school, I should go back to painting because I was a terrible slob. And I am, in some ways, not the neatest person, but in some ways it works to my advantage because I really feel as though these happy accidents. So, this one, for instance, on the screen, I mean, there's all sorts of edges around here. I try when I bring the ink down along the paper on my silk screen not to come all the way. I like leaving places, these patches sometimes, and I don't know exactly what they're going to be. So I've talked a lot lately about my haphazardry. I really try to be in a kind of funny, systematic way, haphazard. I try to match the chaos of some of these early memories and my growing up, which was chaotic and haphazard. I want the prints to finally look as though um, they're not they're not kind of beautiful and well planned. And I think, to my eye, I think I achieved that. And part of that is pushing towards happy accidents. You never know what you're going to get, and also doing it in a way where um, I'm not trying to repeat the process over and over again to get prints that are very, very similar. I want them similar in a range, so the imagery might be similar, but that each one has its own like life. So I don't push towards making a series of prints that look alike. So I hope my haphazardry is pleasant to all of you. And there are wonderful happy accidents because you just don't know. I mean, some of them are, I have a pile of stuff that will no one ever see. So it's not as though I'm the wizard of haphazardry and every print is fantastic. That's not true. But there are enough that I think that really speak to me.
Thank you. Be sure to start putting whatever questions you have in the chat. Robert, you've also written about the layering process, a process that adds depth and dimension and tangled bits and pieces that can be both revealing and obscuring. Could you show us how you go about this layering?
All right, let me just start with the one on the screen first because, oh, it's okay, I'll start with this. So here's one, and this is not the most complicated one. I try to choose one to start off to show you about the layering. So this is the finished product. And so Barbara, you can move to the next one. The paper. Yeah, so here's the paper. And it's just, I use this wonderful, this is about 9 by 12. I use this wonderful paper that's made in India. It's called Shazan. It's all, if you know about paper production, it's all hand poured. So people take, I keep thinking about a small factory of 40 Indian women who are not being paid much, who are not particularly wearing masks, which is a whole issue in art supplies and paper making, and you make the paper pulp and you throw it on a screen, uh, a mesh. So each of the pieces of paper have a different edge, and each piece of paper is a different weight, which also adds to not knowing exactly. So here's the paper I started with that first image. Okay, and then my first process, which should be that one, right, is this. So here's the paper. You see, I didn't come down all the way. There's like these little places where I I intentionally didn't want the ink. So we have like these things on the left-hand side towards the bottom and on the right-hand side, and a lot of the bottom is not covered with ink at all. The image of these kind of figures are drawn on a silk screen with crayon. The crayon adds no color to the print, but the crayon adds these very wonderful soft lines. And anywhere I have a crayon drawing, the ink doesn't get through. So that's why all these lines with the crayon, you can still see the paper in the back. It acts as a mask. So that's the first screen. So then the pinky one. So then I made a very, I don't want to be too technical. I made a very transparent base. I took this transparent base and put just a drop of color in it to make this pink color. And the reason for that is I didn't want to obliterate the image. I wanted just to fill in some of that buff yellow color paper. So now the figures and everything else that was drawn by crayon went from being that kind of yellow color, now they're kind of pink. So that's like the second layer. So the first was the screen with crayon. The second is just um, filling in the spaces. And the last, I used another screen which is very spidery, and it was created as a photo screen, which is complicated. So you can take a photo of anything, and you have to use uh, light sensitive fluid, and you wind up with a silk screen that has these wonderful spidery images. And then I printed that on tap. And so these figures, these images are not the most obscure, but you can start seeing where things um, things are peeping out from behind these spidery images. Sometimes the spidery images, especially where the paper is mostly pink, are more clear than others. The happy accidents have to do with that the ink is not overall on the page, not the green ink, not the pink ink. And also my favorite is the top. where you get the spidery images just across the top border, that beautiful, beautiful blue color, which I had no idea that that would happen, and I had no idea that it would be so pronounced. And I just think it's like this fantastic, um, this fantastic process that allows for all these things to happen that I have no control over, which parallels the narrative of the print. So I'm working something out still.
Robert, I'm going to only ask you one more question because there are several in the chat. Um,
Okay.
because you've spoken a bit about the edges of your work. But I'm going to ask you a question based on my own observation and whether you agree with this. That as an art maker, you definitely need thrive in the presence of people, even though your actual work is very, very internal. And as the geographer says in your statement, is very shy. You are maps are shy, but you are far from a shy person. So I want to ask you about how it is that you are often in class as a student with other artists or as a teacher that energizes your work.
Well, that's one of the reasons I prefer printmaking to painting. Painting has this long history and kind of like poetic life that the painter is up in the garret and is all alone. Printmakers work steadily and are quiet, but then there is these moments where people start talking to each other. It also means that in any given situation in a class I teach, or for instance in Vicky's classes, there is these moments where people will start talking about each other's work that will be promoted right there on the spot. The process is discussed, the end product, the whatever it is, and that's absolutely fantastic. And I enjoy that. I enjoy working with other artists in Vicky's classes. I also love when I teach art classes. Students are fantastic because you relearn the processing, and then there are some students in the class, a lot of them who find their own way of processing. Wow, this is genius. Some of these students have taken the processing and done these extraordinary things with them. You know, very good things or things that don't work sometimes, but you can see the logic in it. And as a teacher, you want to keep track. And as a teacher and an artist who lives for haphazardry, I would be the last person, and Vicky's like this, to say to a student, no, 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 don't do it that way. You have to do it this way. The only time you would say that is if there's an absolute mess that could be helped and controlled by some new way of thinking about processing. But this idea, and this is what Vicky promotes, is try it. As long as I clean up after myself, just try it and see what happens, which I think is a wonderful way as an artist, but also as a teacher and as a student in classes. The other thing is that, and I'll end with this, is that this is the most extraordinary community I've ever lived in. Not only because it's beautiful and we have wonderful friends and it's, but there are such rich resources here of artists. And I mean, I think of my Hani Woodbury behind my head. I mean, watching Hani prepare for an exhibit every year and really like working and working. Um, she's this fantastic role model. She's this wonderful artist. She's kind. She invites me to her studio to use her press. I think about the artists who we work with in Vicky's class who share their work. And I'm saying Vicky also promotes that because we try not to have secrets. I think about someone like Susie Nielsen, who's extraordinary in terms of the art she creates, but she's also she runs another gallery in town. And she and I try to collaborate all the time. or talk about the gallery, or talk about who we're showing, which is very unusual because galleries are supposed to be in the are supposed to be making money, and you don't share artists, you don't share whatever. But someone like Susie who thinks this is a common and cooperative good, and so that's extraordinary because it's not only that you learn from other artists, or you learn from students, or you learn from teachers. I'm also learning from like role models. What does it mean to run a gallery? It's hard work, but what does it mean to be cooperative? What does it mean to watch artists who've been working for years keep keep producing, keep making work? I mean, Hani will make work every year and they're never the same. It's this idea about pushing herself. And I feel the same kind of way, that this is an extraordinary community of people who are kind, who are willing to share information, but also push themselves to the best possible things. So I thank you all for that. How
Robert,
is that?
wonderful. We have a short time left with lots of questions, so I want to give you a sense of the range of them really quickly.
Okay.
Questions from Mary D. How do you choose your colors? To Phyllis, how do you choose your titles? To Vicky,
Okay.
asking you to talk about your paper. And a question about let's see, poetry.
Well,
What's the
okay.
relationship between poetry and your printmaking? So take it
All right.
away.
So what was the first one? The first one was about choosing
Colors,
color.
colors.
So so color is interesting to me because a lot of it is intuitive for me. And when I start the process, I very often will try in the initial stages, try any colors, and I mix some ink and try it. But then there's a process when I finally see what I have, that my process becomes more formal as in form. So if I put stuff aside that I've made and look at it after 3 days, I can think, what's the best color to use? So my haphazard use of colors then eventually comes to something a little more planned out, a little less haphazard. And so um, I like that process too, because it's a good way to train the eye and really start thinking about what I know about color and what will work. It doesn't always work, but as the process goes towards the final finished print, I'm a little more willing to sit and think about it and not be as haphazard. What's the next question?
About how you select your titles.
Well, the titles is I start off with ideas about these series. So this one is, in fact, about growing up and maps, and then um, I will think about the key elements, the key like feelings or words that um, the pieces spark for me, and then I sit and can spend a half a day reading through poems. And it's not just to find titles. I mean, I've already started off with a process where it's a narrative. I kind of know what they're about what I think they're about or feel that they're about, and then I try to find poetry, and then we'll take a line or two as a way. And this is the way I've worked ever since I seriously started making prints. And part of that for me is to involve myself in something that's just not visual, but also poetry is very visual. To involve myself in the pleasure of sitting down for 3 or 4 hours and reading through poems. So that's part of it. Um, I hope that answered the question.
And is that what you want to say about as a poet yourself, how your poetry relates to your printmaking work?
Well, I wouldn't call myself a poet,
Well, you
but
are a published poet.
yes, but it's not something I spend much time at. But I'm very interested in this connection. It's like working with kids in elementary schools, making books with them. What is that connection between what we speak and then when we write and how we visualize it? And I'm fascinated when I watch kids making books, or I'm fascinated um, when I have to start thinking about putting words to this. For me, I mean, the title is interesting. I hope you all like them, but this is really a process I do for myself. So,
There are a couple of questions related to your waves of motivation, inspiration in Emma Shreefter's term. What is inspiring you now? And Dwight wants to know how the COVID pandemic has affected your work this year. So I'll put those questions together.
okay. Well, over the years, what have inspired my work has been very varied. Um, the truth is, I've had times where I'm so moved by things in my life, or so there's large bodies of work I've made that I made after my mother died. I worked on a series. Wendy, Em, and I were living in Cambridge, England for 6 months. I worked on this series for 6 months and produced all this work. Um, Another series I made was after my brother died, and I'm not trying to be morbid. It's just that I I I learned early on, when after my mother died and went to England, that I had such good fortune, not only to be there and be able to work for 6 months, to be able to take this kind of like life with this person who I knew for over 50 years, who I always didn't get along well with, but how to make peace or make something after she died. And I, it was therapeutic. It was making these images that um, really felt authentic to me. And so that sometimes are the waves. Um, what was the question again? Oh,
Well,
but
the
sometimes,
connective about COVID.
well,
Sorry.
COVID, I think I tried to do stuff about COVID specifically, and I tried, but it felt like it was being forced. So I think my first at-home studio. We have a cottage next to our main house that I've taken over the bottom floor and do screen printing in there. It feels like I'm using this time where we don't see many people and it's cold anyway, in this great way where I'm using it as a kind of way of being creative, which I think is my response, if not in the imagery, my response to the pandemic. And there's lots of people who are doing that. I think it's been a very good time for people to reflect and try to keep busy and either use COVID as the jumping off board, which I'm not, but I'm using my time as being like in quarantine in some productive way.
So I'm going to ask two last questions before we sign out off. Um, People want to know, the Clark Howe family, about narrative. Can you talk about why you use the word narrative to describe this body of work?
Well, the this entire uh, body is based on childhood memories. It's based on trying to think about the layers of experience. Um, and so they involve storytelling. They involve my telling my story, which again is more for me than it is for the viewer. I hope the viewer thinks, oh, this is very interesting and moving or beautiful, or without necessarily having to know. So I do a lot of the narrative and the layering, because I some things peep out, some things don't. Some things get obliterated, some things are closed in, some things aren't. And someone in my class that I just took with Vicky said they look like statues embedded on a church wall or something. They're very fixed, which is also interesting about memory. And some of the paper, this is a good example, looks like stone, this kind of yellowish stone. So I think I'm trying to fix them in this kind of memory. But they are the story that I'm telling. I
And
had
what
another
about three twins? Vicky wants to know. Does this relate to your story, your past?
Yeah, I relate. I mean, I was one of an identical, a pair, a set, a series of identical twins. Um, my brother died about 7 or 8 years ago, but I was intrigued with this idea about three twins, which is linguistically a funny thing. We usually think of two twins. So just thinking about just through the years about our relationship to each other, my relationship to being a twin. And I think I've spent a good part of my life being many twins, being many aspects of that relationship. And so this was part of this kind of like map and this um, these figures. So yes, so it has to do with my being a twin,
And
which I don't
finally,
recommend. I don't recommend for many people. Some people do it well, others don't. So
would you be willing to tell us which one is your favorite piece? Gina wants to know.
whoa. Well, it's interesting because since I make them in series, the ones that are called and the sea something, the sea has flown, which if you go back a little bit, it's right before this series. Yeah, like this one, and go to the one before that. Just the one right before. Yeah, like this one. So I these are the the prettiest of them, I think. And there was, after working on the ones that have clearer figures, these were these magnificent relief for me because they're they're beautiful. I mean, the other ones have places in them are beautiful, but the intent was not to be beautiful. And when I started to work on these, I realized, whoa, I have the narrative in here, I have the embedding, I have the layering, but these are really like beautiful. And so I kept coming back to them because sometimes it's difficult. I remember when I made my series, large series, 6 month series after my mother died and after my brother died, it was very, very difficult. It was exhausting to start not only the process of making the prints, but going through the narrative. And these became in some ways my favorite because I think they're very well done. I like them, but there's a kind of like relief in them. There's a kind of joy in them that the others don't have. So while I love some of the others, the this and there's about 6 or 7 of these are not as difficult to produce. They were like my oasis. So thank you, Gina.
Thank you all so very, very much for coming. We're already 10 minutes over our usual time, but thank you. And we wish you
So can I
all the
say,
very best
so
for
we have
2021.
yes, Happy New Year. We're having exciting news to share with all of you in a while. We'll send out a MailChimp to our list. We have all sorts of exciting prospects and projects for next summer. And we're going to continue these Zoom things, whether we can meet face to face or not. So, and I thank you all, and I thank Wendy, and we certainly always thank Barbara Woodbury for her website, for her being able at the last minute to step in and help us with the technology. And she's a joy and a wonderful person to work with. So we thank her.
Thank you all. We'll see you soon.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye. Love seeing
Bye. We
so
love
many of
you.
you.
Bye.
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 Bye. We love seeing you.
Love seeing you. Yeah.
Love seeing you. What beautiful work. Oh my goodness.
Hi,
And your
Jane. Hi.
words. And your words, Robert. Your
I'm
words.
a proud daughter, Dada.
Yes, Emma.
All right.